Hey, okay. So, just wanted to cover who we are. We're Bluefin Data. We've been working in the seafood industry since the late 90s in some form or fashion. I think we were officially in 2006. And software for fisheries, and that's not just specific to any one type of use case, but we have applications or users using our application that are for like for hire fleets, dealers, actual harvesters, harvesters and fishermen. And so I can't just say that we do one specific type of software. However, the very first software that Bluefin Data was delivering was the classic trip ticket application, which is used across the Gulf and northeastern seaboard. The regulatory use cases for our software is regulatory reporting, data gathering, and then we are also getting a little bit into consulting on reporting design whenever there's questions or new regulations or potential voluntary information being thought up. Some of our agencies and partners are giving our information to groups that may be interested and chatting with us, and we're able to start giving some of our history in design decisions for those. Today's presenter, so I'm James Sampson. I am recognizing I am not actually seeing on the screen. Let's see. Yeah, I'm James Sampson. Might be shown. Yeah. I've been programming since about age 7 in some way, shape, or form. Depending on your technical background, you may recognize some of the different languages that I have had some amount of experience in, all the way back to BASIC and GW Basic, VBA, Visual Basic for applications, Java, VB.NET, C#.NET, which is what VESL, our mainline business application, is written in the back end, JavaScript, TypeScript, SQL. There's a few others in there, but that's, I guess, the high level quick list. I started my main career in 2011 after going to college at McNeese State University in Louisiana. I was a physics major and minor, and somehow I ended up stumbling into computers and IT. And then I've been at Bluefin Data since 2017. I started at Bluefin as a software architect, helping to give direction to our systems design. I've always been interested in software architecture since I had started. I also do a lot of requirements analysis, so look at projects and what requirements they have that need to be fulfilled by our clients. I help manage our infrastructure and deploy resources, manage them, make sure they're not crashing, and help them if they are. Information security, compliance and policy management, process management. My job is very well-rounded at this point. So I became CIO at the beginning of this year, last year. Things fly lately. So I've been CIO now since 2021. The reason for Bluefin Backstage is trying to give a little bit more insight into us, the team. So I know a lot of you may have personal knowledge or have met specifically, for example, or Brett. But I'd rather not just be a face behind the screen and give some amount of insight for each of us. So this is our team as it currently stands. Andrew Peterson, he's our CEO. Brett Pierce, he's currently operating as our senior project analyst. He is working and doing a lot of different types of projects and operations with clients. So if you probably know him some shape or form. Myself, James Sampson, CIO. As well, many of you would probably actually chat at some point. We're in cooperation for a form. Camille Catron, he is one of our software developers, as well as Paul Vicknair, who's a senior developer, and Tony Severe. If any of you are working with us in an operational sense with production forms, you will probably have interacted with Tony in some shape or form. He serves as quality assurance for our applications on the back end whenever we're working to get something to production, as well as support. He has a lot of frontline interaction with our actual users and typically funnels information back to us. So this is the Bluefin team. that's where we stand right now. So Bluefin Backstage is welcoming all of you to it. I think I see a few started this a few minutes ago. But what we wanted to do was increase operational transparency, give any of our current clients insight into exactly what we're working on at any one time and a specific time where they can kind of see what things we're working on towards their end, give feedback, they can ask questions, get an idea of who we're working with. We want to steward inter-partner communication between our different clients, as well as those that might not even be clients yet, but just potential interests. We want to give back something to the industry, and so we've now been working since 2006 in some form, and now taking our knowledge and trying to provide knowledge back to the industry, I guess, from our point of view, as well as a forum for discussion. This is kind of what I was mentioning a second ago about where we are now and where we hope to go, and get your insight into that, so we can kind of do this together. This is a black screen for some reason. It just earlier it lost the latter half. Either that or that's modified 3 hours ago. Does this? Oh, hold on. I know exactly where this is. 1 second. So this is in the community project. I moved the presentation. That's what it was. There we go. Sorry. Slideshow from beginning. Yeah. What is this? Send it for you. Okay. Things we wanted to provide for today. Things we wanted to provide for today is some information on VESL's infrastructure, our main applications infrastructure, and kind of how we're operating, how and why we do certain things, and how this applies to our various projects. So we'll go ahead and move on, I guess, into our topics for the day. And we'll start with VESL. And well, sometimes we'll accidentally type this as VESL, VESSEL, just because of consistently typing back and forth with different agencies and topics. That my mind now gets these words mixed up all the time. No, it's VESL, all caps. It's our main line of business platforms. Principles behind it are to help understand the industry and our partners as well as possible whenever we're working on design of the application. We want to, with our application, capture as clean and sound of data as possible. We want there to be actual merit behind it. With our original, the original trip ticket application that has been out for a long time, there were, I guess, less restrictions in place as to what users could enter, and combinations they could pick. This has resulted in also a lot of work on the back end side of data flows in terms of trying to capture and clean that data, potentially reworking back with the original users that entered it to adjust information in it. And so what we're really trying to do with our design is to work with the users and determine what we need to help the user, help the actual end user to do to fulfill out the information as quickly and easily as possible, because we want them, a lot of our users are actual, fishermen or boat captains or dealers going out. And especially for the fishermen, like the last thing they want to be doing is getting on their phone and filling out a report. And so whatever we can do in the design of our application to help guide them to a completed report with whatever information is necessary on it in the most valid way possible, we're always trying to simplify that. A main principle for VESL is configuration-based customization. So in the past, we had developed individual applications along the way that for each new client or application that would come up, we would gather the information. All of these, in the end, were kind of create an application that would gather some information and then save it and then provide it on the backside. And at some point, Andrew, who had been working with his father, it kind of evolved into the role, and was like, well, why don't we do this in one application, and then all of the work that we do can be reused, all we can start to share our improvements from one to the next to the next. And so that is kind of what started VESL. So it's not an acronym. The main, I guess, design or the reason behind the name is it's just minimal and unintrusive. We don't want to be in the way of the users. And it's just a play off of the word vessel or container. That's it, and it's relevant to our industry. So I know we have had people ask, what does VESL stand for? And the deep dark secret is it stands for currently nothing. But we have definitely played with different things it may stand for, and never really settled on anything that we truly like. For those potential more technical in the audience as well, VESL's infrastructure, we've got a bunch of systems working together, multiple services working together. The primary of which is our API or our backend. There's a lot of other things in the backend, but when we typically refer to it, it's the API. That's the core and heart of VESL. Is where our main business logic is for doing all of the reporting actions, configuration, and handling requests from users. There's the forms and configuration part. So this goes back to what I was mentioning a few minutes ago, where one of the design decisions with VESL was that through various different configurations and inputs into the system, we can present a very different experience to users. And so VESL is basically a multi-tenanted application where each of our clients are a separate tenant. We silo information within that, and we use that configuration to customize how we present that experience to our users. There's our client's application at VESL. Those work with the backend, gather the information, show what that configuration is for the user. And then our most prominent backend service, separate from the backend, is what we call our B2A service or business to agency. And so that is what mainly handles our exports from VESL through different mechanisms and services that we're using on the backend. Whenever like a request comes in from one of our client applications to the API to process a request, and a report is being submitted, an event is then raised on a eventing service that we have that then notifies certain subscribers of that. We subscribe to our own event feed, and then our B2A sees that event coming in, and depending on the needs for each of our individual tenants, for example, we have written integrations to do different things. And one of those would be like taking that submitting report and actually processing an export to it in real time to a third party, and then returning any information back from that export to the end user. And that can, as long as everything is working happily, can happen within a matter of about 10 seconds round trip from the user hitting submit, hitting our backend, going to the database, getting evented out, received by the B2A, communicated all the way back to the backend, and then finally back to the client. So there's a lot of working and moving parts, but it's really cool to see them actually functioning and presenting this experience to our users. In today's topic, we wanted to kind of present Swordfish. And Swordfish is the culmination of us trying to solve this problem. And the problem is that we as developers don't really like to repeat our code. Code is already hard to maintain whenever you write it. It's guaranteed there's going to be bugs in it. There's bugs all the time. No matter what you do, applications have bugs in it. So whenever that happens, you want to be able to maintain that easily. And if you have a way of doing something, ideally you don't want to have multiple ways of doing it. You want to have a standard way of doing it. And then if there's an error in it, you apply a fix, and that fix is replicated. So you're not having to repeat fixing something in multiple places, or potentially doing one thing in multiple ways, and each of them is broken a separate way, in a separate, unique, and special way. And that type of fixing of one issue in one place and propagating that down the line is just timely to handle fixing. So Swordfish is our internal artifact fee, our internal artifacts that we've kind of codenamed. It's a set of libraries that we have written ourselves, and we're still writing, constantly working on. They're written in C#10 with .NET 6. They're a set of class libraries written in C# and published internally on the NuGet feed that we host. I know that there were a couple of people that registered for today's webinar that actually are utilizing some of those packages already. And right now we are kind of providing use to those in a one-off basis, but we're trying to get it to the point where we want to actually get it published out on a public NuGet feed. So we're returning, able to provide anyone that's our tools and our framework to communicate with us and communicate with third parties. This makes it really easy to update. So we kind of make our code in one place and push it up to our repository. It gets built, tested, verified, and published out as a package. And then whenever any type of application we're going to utilize that logic, we just reference the package. And then whenever there's updates, all we have to do is update a single version number. It's a very simple process for us developers to handle. It also provides a centralized logic for complex operatons. Apparently I misspelled that. Spelling is complex. So there are certain operations and certain types of logic that we form that can be very complex. And so to be able to centralize our logic for handling that are fixed in one place and then easily update and reuse that across the entire uses is really important to us. So internally, we use this for a few of our projects for exports. We use this in terms of different patterns for what we do, like caching and resiliency, as well as just different utilities. And something I didn't put on here, one of our primary uses that is also talking with so some examples I wanted to provide today are registering with if you have like a C# application already, like how you could pull in our library and how you register it to be used, as well as giving an example of working with VESL and kind of what that experience is like. And then a third one is working with SAFIS. And I know there were several people on here who are actually from SAFIS. So you can actually see how we are working and centralizing our logic and building how we communicate back to you. So I guess, are there any questions as of now, as of this moment? Yeah, I don't see. There is a Q&A as I'm going along this. If you see at the top of your screen, there's a Q&A button. You can feel free to post any questions there. You can unmute yourself and just chat. I'll also have a slide at the end if you want to bring up anything at that point. So awesome. Okay. Well, so I'm going to keep this mostly more simple for the time being, and then later on, if anyone is interested in some more information on that, feel free to reach out to me. I will provide my information on the last slide, so you can feel free to email me and gather some more technical information. But I do know a lot of the people that are on here today might not necessarily be technical resources, but we still wanted to kind of provide an example so that maybe you could also see how this might apply to maybe your own internal technical teams and provide this as an option for them for various uses. So this, there we are. This, for example, this is just an application. This is called LinkPad, and this allows me to write code in a very simple scripted manner and treat the language as kind of like a scripting language, so where I can just run commands and run it and get immediate feedback on it. And so this is just a simple example here. And let's say you have an existing application written in .NET, anything since .NET, originally .NET Core 1, 2, Microsoft had produced a internal, not an internal, they produced a package called Microsoft.extensions.dependency injection, as well as a bunch of other things. But basically any of their product or project templates at this point utilize their own dependency injection container exposed as service collection and service provider. And so if you have an existing application, you would have a place to actually plug this in fairly easily. So you would have some place where you're provided this services collection, and to utilize our common library, for example, and do interactions with our single sign-on server or our backend API or SAFIS. We've tried to have a very standardized methodology of doing that. So our first one is you're just calling Bluefin data services, and I'm registering a set of services. And so then you say, okay, I want to register SSO. All of these are methods and are provided as suggestions whenever you're typing your code, so you can see what's available here. So if you're registering SSO, you're provided a builder, and here you're going to say, I want to connect the SSO to development environment and also connect to production with some type of default client configuration. This is considered a fluent pattern, and if you are writing your own at this point, this fluent pattern is written in such a way that it guides you on what you need to do next. And so I can't just then say again connect to, because that's not valid at this point. It now wants a configuration. So here it's a default client configuration, but we have different other ways of configuring the client that you would talk with us. There we go. Internally with a lot of our systems, we, a common need is being able to authenticate to them. And so here I'm saying whenever I'm working in this application with our SSO server, I want to use some built credentials, and I'm building a new interactive credentials. This means whenever I'm running it, it will actually be able to pop up a window and sign me into our single sign-on server. And this is just a client ID, so I'm just saying I'm referencing our SDK. And then I use a credential builder, and I'm saying I'm authenticating using a chain of credentials, and the only one in that chain right now is interactive. So our authentication methodology is really modeled after Microsoft with their cloud platform Azure and their authentication methodology, allowing a user to specify a chain of potential ways to communicate, and the application working through each of those to find the best fit and to use it. So that's why we have a chain credential, and here I'm only adding that interactive one. It's going to store the access token that's received from our sign-on. It's going to store a refresh token using the user profile, so this will store it into my user profile on this computer, and it builds the credential and returns that. And so you see how this is just basically, it is code, and is not straight English, but we've definitely tried to write how we construct and do certain operations in a very friendly way, so that it is hopefully as easy as possible to use for people that are new to the framework. And you can see a very similar methodology for that. Whenever I want to use our VESL API services, I add VESL API. I'm connecting to development with the default configuration. And I'll connect with or authenticate with an iCredential. For those developers, again, amongst you, that's just an interface which is registered with this command. And then as a third, just showing this is a third-party service that we're communicating with. So I'm adding our SAFIS API services, connecting to test with the default configuration, and I just want to be able to have an anonymous client for now. And so this is the general way that you can register our services into your application, and a lot of this is very flexible. And so if you need to register various different credentials and various different configurations, you're able to do all of that. This is just, I guess, an abbreviated way for showing the most direct route. And then even on top of that, I say the most direct route. Internally, we use this application I'm in right here a lot called LinkPad, and we separately have built a set of services or a set of methods called Bluefin Data Utilities. And I say, I want to build a default VESL and SSO client, and I want to point it to development and have a client. So that's I guess step one is if you already have an application, you can add services to your application in this way. If you already have a .NET application, you can add those services to your application in this way using the built-in container that Microsoft does provide with the service collection. And then all you would have to do is call get required service, authenticated VESL API client, or use actual dependency injection. So you would just take in an authenticated client. So that's the first example I wanted to show, is just how to interact and integrate that into your application so you can start to use it. And then let's say you actually had an application that you wanted to use it. There we are. So here I'm going to use that second method I had mentioned, where we want to build a default client to interact with VESL and our SSO server. And here I'm really only caring about the SSO side, so I'm pulling this one out. I'm discarding the other. I'm pointing it at our development server. And so in VESL, we have a very common, very repetitive set of operations that we have to do. So any of almost every action almost in VESL is done in the context of a tenant. So for one of our clients that's operationally within VESL, whenever we're doing in and out or data access operations, we want to say it's within the scope of this tenant, because we've kind of built our silos around that for security and privacy. And so the tenants typically will be set up with some code, just a unique identifier that we use to reference. And so called get form here. This get form, I've just pulled this out to a method as an example. So our API client is made such that the property accesses off of it map to URI path segments on our API. And so if I pull up our API, so here's our actual API. This is api-dev.vesseldata.com. You can hit this as well. All this mainly is right here is our version endpoint. It's basically something we can just check to be sure that our server is alive and responding. And so it gives you the time and just how old this build is. On that server, we also expose what's called a Swagger endpoint. This provides a metadata document about our API that developers can utilize and integrate into their application. And it can also be used to generate a client for them to use. And we had tried that at one point, and then we ended up writing our own so that it had a very specific and standard and expandable way to be used for us. But if you look here, there's this form area of requests, and here I want to say get form. So this action will return a list of available forms for this user. And so it's showing you kind of a payload of what would be returned, example information that could be in that. Over here, that basically maps straight to forms get. That's this forms get. So here I'd say, like, get me a form, and this would then be awaited since this occurs in the background and give you a response. So this response right here would say, this is from our main HTTP client library that we use called Refit. It actually generates code into our common client on build that is fantastic. It's really accelerated our way for implementing these. But this is a general refit response, and it gives you direct access to what was on the response, including the status code. And you can see the content here, which is this next object. All of our actions on the API return a similar object called an operation result. They have a success and any type of data payload. If something fails, it'd be a false, and you might not have a data payload, or you might have specific information. There's errors, warnings, information returned from that. So this is one way of performing this kind of talk with the API. Like, I want to get the forms that I have access to. Get the forms I have access to. I might want to check to see if it succeeded or not. And then here would actually be the form that was returned from the list of forms that was returned from the server. But another way that we can do that is we identified, we're consistently doing checks like this where we check to see if did it succeed. And also I want to go into the content and get the actual data that was returned from that operation. For that, we also have another set of extensions. So you can call to get the list of forms, get. Then we have this method here called success. And we say, I want to wait this asynchronous operation for it to succeed in the end. And this success is also built to support a set of validations. So I can pass in a response here and check things about it. That I have content data, like that I have any forms in the response. If this fails, it would then now not past this point, it would throw a validation exception. So this provides us a quick and easy way to actually start providing multiple validations. Single where the form, sorry, my autocomplete is yelling at me. Data. So this success method basically this success method basically just supports adding as many types and as many parameters as you want here, where it takes in the response, and then this side of the function is just returning a Boolean, whether or not it succeeded or not. So are there any forms? Were there anywhere the code equaled something? If I ran this, it would fail because we don't have any forms with that code. That's one example. At which point now we'd be able to say, okay, in that list of forms I got back, find me this one form called Bluefin Backstage, and our forms get supplies what we call our form header information. This is just like the very basic. This is the name of the form, the agency it's for, what certain things are called on it. And then the form payload is actually like if you go to that form and get all of the information on it, which is through this second call. And so here you'll see on the client, I'm accessing the forms endpoint, except here I'm passing in an ID of the form header. Now, that is then matching to this, where that request hits API forms form ID. Yeah. And the idea here is that any regular property in our API client maps to a URI segment, and then any indexed property where you're passing in a value like the form ID is passed as an indexer. So here I'm saying header ID value, and I can call get, and then it gets success. So that is generally an example of how we communicate with our API internally. So on our backend services that I was talking about for B2A, we utilize this for all of our own interactions because we actually talk with our backend services using our own client so that we can update it and maintain issues as they come along. And then here's an example. Now that I have the form for Bluefin Backstage, I can go to the client forms for that form ID, get its reports for that report ID. This is a specific one that I just found that exists, and get that report. And here I have a report. And in terms of common logic that can be more difficult is some adapters that we have. So we have adapters that expose a lot of complex business logic around how to interpret our form. And so a form can have sections, and those sections have various configurations. Our form adapters basically expose that as saying, here's the set of fields on it. Here's, let's see, it's the report context. So this has a report context, and then that has details underneath it. So VESL supports being able to capture data at multiple levels of nestability. It's an interesting one. But this form adapter and this report adapter help to take in the information, the raw data, and then interpret it in a way that is consistent and clean and understandable. So that was the second example, just in terms of like working with VESL. And then the third one is like how we talk to SAFIS. And so I wanted to show an example of how we interact with the SAFIS API on our side. So in SAFIS, I'm going to use that same Bluefin data utils I mentioned earlier. I'm going to build a default SAFIS client pointing to their test server. And then here I'm going to authenticate that client using a new SAFIS credential. So this is just a class that we provided in our library. And here I'm using a function of this application to store passwords not in the code so that it's not just saved in code, but this is stored securely. I'm just getting the password from this variable. So here I'm creating just a new credential, passing that variable, and now I've got an authenticated client. One of the extremely common interactions with SAFIS that we have to perform repeatedly is just getting a list of lookups. And so, for example, we have, let's say, a list of species that we want to get up for some type of interaction or integration that we're doing on a form. And so here I can call on that client to get a lookup list of species DTO. And the parameter here just takes in the partner. Since SAFIS supports multiple partners or multiple tenants as well from their side, you need to kind of say what type of scope you're looking for your information. So here I'm saying for partner 16, which I believe is for GARFO, right? Yeah, we'll just say GARFO. And then I'm going to use that same method I showed before where I say I want to wait for that to call to succeed. So this would be one way of getting lookups, but we also generally have to receive or retrieve a larger set of lookups from ACCSP and potentially for more than one partner. We have one of our forms, for example, is integrating with ACCSP and performing a real-time submission of data from an end user clicking submit. And if that user fits certain parameters, they are considered they are potentially federally permitted in a certain situation. So we have to go retrieve one set of lookups specific to that. And if they're only state permitted, for example, then we have to retrieve a whole other set of lookups and combine them. It's a lot of fun. And so this, since we saw this occurring in our applications repeatedly, we wanted to kind of simplify going and grabbing all the information, as well as being able to store it in reference and make sure if it hasn't been updated since the last time we got it, that we don't actually have to call their backend to retrieve that information repeatedly. So here I'd be able to say, I want to gather the set of lookups. And then here, for example, I'm saying I want to get those for GARFO, CERO, their combined list as well. This is if someone's like dual permitted federally. So this is for species, this is for gear, trip attributes, gear attributes. This method here will actually take in this, and this can be actually a list with data in it as well as a date of last updated. So if this last updated date has a value, it's going to check and see whether or not that list has been updated since the last time it was requested for that specific partner. And it will do that in one call per partner. So even though there's 1, 2, 3, there's 4 separate lists here being requested for 3 different partners, it will only do 3 requests, 1 for each partner for all of the lists that are being requested. It would fill in the information and see if it's been updated since then and add that to a set of lists that it needs to go back and gather more information on. And it will actually perform that operation at least twice in that situation to ensure that it potentially hasn't been updated since the last time it just checked to see if it was updated, if there was a race condition, for example. So if I run this as an example, now it's going through this one long method of getting multiple lookups from multiple agencies, perform that. And at this point, I actually now have those set of lookups. Unfortunately, at this point, I don't actually have the information from here saved locally, and so I'm not getting that benefit right now in this script for saving that information. But for our other backend services, it is something that we've got. And then the common thread that we're always facing when we're working with this is kind of walking through a set of lookups. And so I think we interact with, I don't know, 8 to 10 different lookups for one of our forms. I'm trying to think. Anyways, we interact with several of the different lookup lists for at least 2 or 3 partners on one of their forms. And so we provide, we've kind of built out this entire capability of walking through lookups that we have retrieved back. So all of these are produced and then stored into one bundle list of lookup lists that we've received. And then here I can, there we go. And then here I can say, okay, I want to start searching through that list and say, I want gear attributes. So this method right here is just built in for this application I'm in that produces the information, so I can set it down here. But this one would find the gear attributes. Then I can say, I want those for partner 16, for example, or for partners. If I'm doing a set of operations and I need to potentially interact with multiple at the same time, I could say 0016 and 0018, and this is now going to filter that list to only those. And then I can toss on top of that and I can say active, forge, with trip type context. There we go. Okay, and then here's a good example. For many of the ACCSP values that we interact with, we identified a lot of these are like value types. And so one of those value type for trip type. There are 4 trip types available, commercial for hire charter, headboat or recreational. And so we provide those as more like programming objects that you can interact with instead of having to remember that this is R, I believe. Here we can say recreational. And so now I can say, I want to marry those attributes up because these attributes that we interact with will say that they are, like here's an attribute, and then it's required for this trip type. It's not gathered for this trip. It's optional for this trip type, and whatever. So this context kind of marries up the information saying, this is a recreational trip that I'm in the context of. So now whenever I then have this, I can say is available for trip type. So we can do that. It is required for trip type. That's not quite the right path. So there's a separate method. I'm forgetting it at this moment, but basically all of these methods are cumulative filters on the set of values that we originally get back here to allow you to just continuously drill down deeper and deeper into the data. So for these, since now I'm at gears, I can say gear 1, maybe. Let me dump that out. And because I'm only working with gears, let's see, I'm looking for gear attributes. So I'm going to do this. Let's see, so gear attributes for 1. Let's try that. There we go. So in this method, for example, I started searching through the set of lookups. I'm looking for gear attributes, and here I dumped that out as a gear attribute window so I can look at just the full list that came back. Here you can see we've kind of actually provided some overrides so that whenever we're looking at this in different places, we can actually see just a friendly representation of that for us. So I can see that this is gear quantity per gear or something, all of the information from it. Now I've provided that with some context. I'm saying this is a recreational trip for partners 16 and 18, and I want to only find those for gear 401. So at this point, I can go to this final one where I also output that information. I see all of these are now specifically for gear 401. These actually are displaying whether or not what the required flag is based on that attribute for the trip type that I had associated earlier for the recreational trip type. And I see that all of these are for partner 0016, so it appears 0018 does not actually utilize this gear, whichever it may be. Interesting. So this is one way of working with the SAFIS API that we do a lot, which is just working with the attributes. But as well, we can do client authenticated. For example, if we wanted to upload a new trip, we've built this trip DTO into our application, so I can build a new trip DTO, associate an entire model. So we have all of the information that's available based on their API specification, built in as properties for certain things like, try and see if I have a good example here for like date time. The SAFIS API utilizes a string type value for that, which only has a date aspect in there. Since in VESL, we store all of our information in the form of a full date time offset that captures date, time, and offset information with time zone. We've kind of built out extrapolations for that, so I can say trip start date. We have a value type called datish that we've built out for ACCSP interaction. And here I can actually pass in like a new date, time, offset. There we go. And it will not like this trip though. What is it yelling? Oh, it wants notification detail. Probably a different method there. Oh. Yeah, that's better. So here's an example of us calling like a method to upload a notification DTO for them. And we pass in objects, and we've represented, we've built out the models to represent their different data models on their side in a standard way. So anytime we're interacting with their API now, we are utilizing this client and adjusting it as necessary. So it's kind of started to really accelerate anytime we're working with different operations with the SAFIS API, how we can actually get something built out. So that's a rudimentary example. I'm not going to actually execute this because I don't want to start sending actual information to them. I more really actually wanted to do with getting of information. But we do have built out methods for sending basically declarations, trips, negatives, retrieving the list of errors, carrying all that information up on the backside and seeing which ones failed in that. So that was the majority of really what I wanted to show at Swordfish. All of that was us kind of interacting with our common library. And I know it was more technical in that, but we really wanted this to be open for anyone to see and join, and hopefully see, the way we've written it has been highly focused on making it simple for us as developers to use. And we also want it to be as clear as possible so that whenever you're reading it, it's very clear as to what's happening. So hopefully, even for those that might not be as technical amongst you, it's clear enough and you could kind of get an idea of what we were doing there. So for questions, I've got this as parting notes, but we'll also look and see if there's any questions up there. I don't see any currently. Does anyone have anything they'd like to bring up? Everyone's on mute. Andrew, do you have anything you want to say?
No, I think that was a good example. We do, although he showed an example of SAFIS, we do have some methods for the GARFO API as well. So we'll be expanding on this. This is just kind of James and the team have been working on this for 3 years.
2 or 3 years ago.
So this has been a work in progress, and we will continue building this out because it's immensely helpful on our side, and we really want to start sharing it because I think others will find it useful as well. All right, we do have one question. Jeff, the floor is yours.
Hey guys, thanks for the presentation. It's good to kind of see that you're using the ACCSP API as it's designed to pull back the lookup codes and submit the information. James, one of the things that you pointed out was the ability to give error messages back to the fishermen end users within some very short period of time. Can you follow up on your status with that and kind of how that's working out?
I mean, for us, it seems to be working out well. We really had our first project start doing that November of last year. Was the first project that we actually had come up where they needed to have kind of real-time information being presented back to them. And so we already have that entire process built out. So on the users app, on the user side, they're going to be typically using our phone application, and they would, for the phone application for VESL, they fill out their report, they hit submit. I believe it presents them a pop-up asking them to confirm that they're submitting the report and all the information is completed. They hit yes. That report then gets sent to our server. Our server updates it with all of the validations that we have, that we know about from our talks with the agency and government partners. That is then saved to our database in a submitting state. It gets sent out on our eventing platform. We use Azure Event Grid. That's then received by our business to agency functions, B2A shorthand, and an HTTP endpoint that subscribes specifically for reporting the events for that form. That is then that then creates an export record on VESL for that report in a pending state. It gathers all the information from SAFIS, tries to convert the report over to the SAFIS using all of the information we have, sends it, gathers the errors that are returned from the SAFIS side, then returns those errors back into the VESL on the back end saying, okay, this report has now been saved. This report has now been exported. Here's the information that occurred. And it commits the export or it fails the export. And then after that, it finally will say, okay, everything was good with the submission, so it's submitted. And if it didn't submit correctly, if there was a failure, it then pulls the report back from the submitting status into withdrawal. So on the user side, they hit submit. It takes about 1.5 seconds for it to get processed through our backend, about a half second for it to hit our B2A server, up to whatever amount of time it typically takes to communicate with ACCSP on that one. I think we're on average 5-ish seconds or so, I think, for our export to ACCSP. I think currently 5-ish seconds, and then about a half second or second back to VESL. And then in that meantime, the client application is just polling our server, looking for an update on that report, seeing if it's been updated using an E tag. It basically says, this is a version of the report I have. Has it changed since then? So we're able to provide information. And also we do some pre-flight checks. There are some validations that we can't perform on our application that are kind of like server run. And so if it gets all the way to the export process, but we're doing some last minute checks, we can also present errors before we even send it to ACCSP to get transmitted.
That's good. And how many of your forms, which forms is that active for today versus which
so it's
ones
active.
are kind of in work?
We have 15 forms-ish or so in production. 5 of those are sending to ACCSP, I believe, 5 or 4. And only one of them currently is doing that real-time submission. That's actually our latest one using the real-time submission. But I think there have been talks or requests to essentially expand that to more. So if we did that, then more users would be able to have that type of more immediate interaction.
Good future plan.
What's that?
I think that's the agency agreements for wanting to have error messages passed back to the users for, all the forms that get submitted.
So all of our
with different agency validations, because there are, of course, ACCSP validations that occur within SAFIS, and then records that flow up to GARFO. GARFO has their own set of validations and error messages that come back to us that, of course, we would pass back to you in similar format.
So all of our exports do present that information to the user when there is an error. Like they will actually get stored that it was successful or not. But the user, like they submit it and it goes into like for those that aren't real time, it goes into a submitted status. But then if there is an error in sending it to ACCSP, it's then generated as a lagged export information on the report. So it's not that real time interaction. I think 10 minutes or others.
Yeah, that's what I expected, but I just wanted to find out kind of the scale of how many forms and which ones were using the real time and how many more are, in development for moving that direction. So you've answered that. Thank you.
Awesome. Does anyone else have any questions? So quiet. Awesome.
Such a good presentation. Mike Judge
Awesome.
and Joshua Lee.
Oh, okay. They're raising hands. Cool. Okay.
Mike, go ahead. See, Mike, you're still muted.
I don't.
Here, Mike, I'll try and. No,
You can't unmute him.
Unmute him.
That would be very problematic.
Yeah.
You want to pull Joshua then?
Yeah, Joshua, go ahead.
Hey guys, can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Hey, what do you know? Okay, so volume does work for me. That's good. Thanks for the presentation. It was really rad to see kind of behind the scenes some of the back end stuff that you guys are doing. It's actually really impressive. This is kind of a tangential question, maybe outside the scope of the meeting, but I'd just be curious to know if you guys have had any experience or looked into kind of the underlying technologies for progressive web applications, be they with React or some of the other things, maybe using IndexedDB. I'm mostly asking selfishly just to see what folks in the region have had experience with some of the technical implementation of PWAs, and just to kind of expand my my black book of people to know and talk to. So
So we actually have looked at PWAs. We originally were looking at PWAs for the rest of people in the audience that might not know, PWA is Progressive Web Application. It is a technology or set of ways of building what starts as a website that then can progressively improve or change its experience depending on if it gets installed by the user onto their phone. So in all of the modern browsers nowadays, you can visit certain websites. I think even Google, I think Google presents itself as this in one of their ways, but you can go to like Google and pin that site to your home, and it would present itself with an actual like Google icon. It would store some information about coloring and that, and then it can also potentially do some certain interaction native functions on your device. We have looked at that. VESL Web actually, it's not really a PWA, but it does have some of that metadata support. So users can pin the VESL application, the VESL website to their phone, and it will show up with a VESL icon. It stores some color information as well, presents like some application. But our current VESL Web application is actually a bit legacy at this point. It was written originally in Angular JS 1.59. And it has a ways to go. What we started looking at PWAs when we started working on our current mobile app. Our current mobile app is written in React Native version 0.64. I think so. Currently, we still have some updates to do on that one. We originally were looking at PWAs, but there were certain operations that we needed to do that really PWAs weren't a good fit for at the time, and so it just went straight to React Native. Our next generation, we're already, I guess, architecting our next generation for VESL, and we're moving really to a fully centralized shared business logic amongst all of our client applications using React with React Native and React DOM for web, with using a technology called NX. There's NX workspaces or NX console. So NX allows you to make a monorepo with JavaScript, TypeScript projects. And so that's actually going to be our next iteration. So we have looked at PWAs. I have to honestly pull my notes back up. I remember at the time I didn't feel that they worked for us because of something. And I don't remember what that something is right now. But yes, we have.
cool, right on. Thanks. That's great. For what it's worth too, I think the name VESL is actually way cooler because it's not an acronym. And so I applaud you guys for being the one group in the region to just go all in on just a rad name that wasn't an acronym.
It is a question that we have received many a time. Like, what's it stand for? And it's like very excellent software.
We still can't come up with an L.
Yeah.
Meaning of a very excellent software, something.
Did Michael Judge figure out, so was he able to get fixed up? Maybe not.
Mike, you can also post it in the chat.
Yeah.
Easier for you.
Is it?
Yeah, sorry guys, I wasn't trying to raise my hand. I pushed the wrong button.
Oh,
There you go.
there you go. Also, thank you, Janet. I just saw Janet. I think I just saw your message. Appreciate the feedback. If anyone has anything else, again, my email is just james.sampson, first.last at bluefindata.com or support@bluefindata.com. Multiple people receive that, and I am on there all the time anyway. So, we all good?
I think so. All right. Any final questions? Thoughts?
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Ready, guys? Take care.
Thanks, guys.